Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss whether the Conservatives may be risking a strategic error with their continued push for less scrutiny over their own actions and more control over others, given that they are now likely to lose the next election. Rather than creating an abusive level of power for themselves, are they not now instead just using their remaining time in government to risk giving Labour more power? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So we have a Conservative Party in government that now rules by blind ideology and panic. The former pragmatism that I long associated with them seems to have evaporated. Over the past few years, the Tories have been pushing ever more illiberal legislation through Parliament. And you could argue at the time it made strategic sense to hold on to power when they were becoming less and less popular. But let's consider some of the things they've done. They've reduced the role of Parliament in scrutinising trade negotiations, giving the government more power to agree deals without much, if any, public scrutiny. They've removed the independence of the Electoral Commission, meaning that a senior member of the government decides what they do and do not investigate when it comes to electoral irregularities. They've passed a series of bills which prevent and punish peaceful protest. It is now, in theory, unlawful to even stand on the street in silence without blocking anyone's access to anything, just holding a placard. And there's another angle here as well. There's a bill that's a particularly extreme form of it, but it's one of those post-Brexit bills which essentially aims to take away our rights. Look at what the Tories have been doing the last few years as their chickens come home to roost. Instead of trying to fix some of the damage they've caused, they've spent most of their time trying to take away our rights to complain about it. You know, you've got the bill I'm referring to is the retained EU law bill, aims to get rid of a load of regulations. You know, I mean, what they've been doing, they've been passing legislation to make peaceful protest illegal. They're thinking about passing legislation to prevent strikes being too impactful, which would only serve to make the causes of industrial unrest worse. You know, to highlight just how dangerous the recent legislation was, you know, in terms of peaceful protest. A barrister attended Parliament Square in the wake of the Queen's death a few months ago with a blank piece of paper. Just held up a blank piece of paper. An officer approached him and threatened him with arrest if he wrote "Not My King" on it. Now, maybe this particular plod was just a bit thick, and a court would have thrown out any resultant charges if it turned out that more senior officers who pushed for the prosecution were just as thick. But the purpose of recent Home Office legislation has been to allow the government to send in the police to break up any protest they deem annoying. In this regard, we've seen far-right protests from the sort of voters that the Tories need to keep on side, policed, and we've seen peaceful protests broken up by the police. Some of these draconian measures were promised in the 2019 manifesto. It was no surprise. I did a video about the section which described them and said it would be incredibly dangerous times with such a majority. And so it's turned out to be. If anything, they've actually gone even further. They still have proposals to make the government less accountable to the courts. I suspect that this manifesto promise is maybe not given such urgency because there is a bit of evidence, I'm not going to point fingers, that some senior judges have been mindful of the threat to the independence of the judiciary and are just being a little bit wary. They're maybe going out of their way a little bit not to anger the government too much. Now, the problem with this, if true, we don't know it's true, is any judges that are behaving like this are basically removing their own independence. But all of these measures and proposals are there to set themselves above the law and prevent the rest of us doing much about it. In fact, there was a time when I was very deeply concerned about the path the UK was taking. I'm still moderately concerned, but it's reined back a bit. You cannot fail to notice the parallels between what the Tories have been doing and the now well-established playbook of fascist takeovers of the 20th century. I really thought if the Tories win the next election, it could be the last election. Well, until we got past the other side of fascism anyway, because fascism always ends. And it's never a tidy end. And the retained EU law bill, which intends to just, like I say, abolish thousands of regulations without parliamentary or public scrutiny, is another example. You know, my focus is often on the consequences, on the huge damage it would do to the economy, to people's standard of living. But behind that's the motivation for it. Why are they doing it? The authors of the bill are using it to consolidate their own power, to concentrate power, not into Parliament, into the government. It's just that this time it's on a really grand scale. The previous legislation, as draconian as it was about victimising minority groups to set ordinary people against each other. Divide and rule, oldest political trick in the book. This bill aims to target the masses. It's a proper first they came scenario. People, allowed themselves to focus their hatred at innocent people, and now they're not noticing that the government are coming for the rest of them. But draconian legislation to consolidate your power only works when you have that power. We're not yet a fascist dictatorship. That fear has receded a little. In 2 years' time, Labour are likely to be in power, barring something quite remarkable. Yes, they will want to correct a lot of these betrayals of our rights, but that would require parliamentary time. The Tories have been using a lot of time to remove our rights, but Labour want to govern. They'll not have time to tackle our broken country and put all those rights back without being in power for a very long time. I don't think I can overemphasise just how much parliamentary time the Tories have been using to make these power-grabbing changes. This is part of the reason why the main job of government is simply not getting done. Even the bits that Tories normally agree needs doing. People thought it was Brexit arguments that prevented the government focusing on getting things done. No, it was Tory empire building. It still is. You look at all of their main legislative programmes over the last few years, and all of them involve in some way or other taking power from the masses and concentrated it into, not Parliament, into Downing Street. So much legislation gives ministers of the Crown to make changes without having to refer to Parliament now. A Tory MP is not reconsidering their strategy of consolidating all that power into like one building. Because what it seems like they're doing now is consolidating that power into the waiting hands of their opponents. Maybe they recognise their own evil and that a Labour government would not use the powers as vindictively as they would. But I mean, I'm a Labour supporter. And of course, I approve of the party I support. And I don't think the leaders of the party are angels. So I can't imagine actual Tories do. Are they not concerned that powers that they're stealing for themselves right now will be inherited by their opponents after the next election? I mean, if they're not thinking that, I think they perhaps should. I mean, I certainly don't expect a Labour government to abuse these powers to anything like the degree the current Tories are and would. Frankly, I wouldn't have expected former Conservative governments to be this abusive with our rights. Many of them genuinely believe in social freedoms. It's just that the current crop have convinced themselves, even when they disagree, it's all for the greater good somehow. Because they're trapped. They know they can't win an election fairly now, so they're trapped. They believe that they are the party of good, and the only way to remain in government is to steal the election, so they consider it, a minor evil for the greater good. But although there will be pressure for a Labour government to remove, some of these bits of legislation, it's not that simple. If they set out to dismantle all of the power-grabbing measures that the Tories have spent years imposing, they'll get nothing else done. There'll be no fixing the economy. There'll be no fixing the NHS. There'll be no fixing other public services. There'll be no healing society. There'll be no time for it. Then they'll lose the next election. Their manifesto is going to be chock full of things that need fixing and that are really important to voters and how they intend to do it. And it all requires parliamentary time. Legislation that gives the government powers that it should not have will not be a priority to remove while Labour are in a strong position in government, because they will just think, well, we're not going to use them, so there's no great danger while we're in power. Given time, they'll be removed, because they don't want to leave them there when the Tories come back. But as the various acts of Parliament are updated, you will remove them. But it would be folly for Labour to start repealing them as soon as they're in power. I mean, they've already committed to repealing any further anti-strike laws that the government introduced, which they say they're going to do this year. Remember, they've got 2 more years to introduce all sorts of terrible legislation. Labour need to show voters that the change of government will have changed their fortunes. So they'll have to prioritise parliamentary time for that. You don't do it by wasting time removing powers you don't intend to use anyway. But what if they did use them? Tory MPs considering that. What if they did use them? The problem with concentrating powers into the hand of a small number of people in government is that, it's great for you when you're in government. You get to do the greater good stuff. But you're also handing those same powers to your opponents once you've shit the bed badly enough that the public throw you out. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.